Okay, don't be mad. I know what the title says. I know. But what if I have? Honestly, I think I really have. I think I've solved Glamrock Freddy. Recently, TDreads discussed the topic of Glamrock Freddy on his FNaF Mysteries show, and shortly after that, ID's Fantasy released her own theory video on the topic. Funnily enough, I decided to make my own video on it before even seeing either of those videos, but I have watched them, and the videos were both very good. But I think I have the ultimate answer, or answers, for who Glamrock Freddy might be. It's based on a theory from a YouTube short I made a couple years ago, but now with Secret of the Mimic, it seems even more likely. So who is Glamrock Freddy? Is it Michael? Is it the bite victim? Cassidy? Just an AI? Let's find out. Back when Security Breach first released, I, MatPat, and a bunch of other people came up with the idea of Glamrock Freddy being Michael Afton. This was a theory that actually preceded the release of Security Breach, as it was noticed in some of the trailers that Gregory actually had 2 stripes on his shirt, just like the crying child. And because Michael killed the bite victim, the idea of Freddy being Mike, subconsciously trying to make up for his past mistakes, protecting him the way he couldn't protect the bite victim before, bloomed. And it expanded drastically when the game actually came out. In the game, Gregory has numerous connections with the bite victim. The MatPat design comparison is a big meme, but that doesn't mean he's wrong, as their designs are really similar. Gregory is also called Broken by Freddy, just like the bite victim in FNaF 4. On top of that, the character encyclopedia has art of the bite victim, and in this design, he has a band-aid on his knee in the exact spot Gregory does. And in the Princess Quest ending, he takes a big bite out of a yellow Freddy popsicle, just like how the bite victim was bitten in the head by a yellow bear animatronic. That Princess Quest ending image also shows the head of Freddy as well as Vanessa. Freddy is in the middle, while Gregory and Vanessa sit on either side, which may or may not be a reference to this image from FNaF World, which the files label Happiest Day. The center shows a larger figure with its arms around 2 smaller figures. Although it's debatable whether the bite victim is actually the golden Freddy spirit from Happiest Day, I do think it is clear that he's the one Happiest Day is being set up for, which I talk a lot about in my Shatter Victim video from last year if you want to know more. The 3 all sitting together seems almost like the 3 Afton kids all sitting together, whether figuratively or literally. Vanessa herself has some interesting connections with Elizabeth as well. First, there's the design details, like how she has blonde hair and green eyes. Plus, she eats ice cream in the Princess Quest ending, and Elizabeth literally dies for ice cream. The retro CDs also give some interesting clues, like how she has a father named Bill, which is short for William, doesn't like dark basements when Elizabeth was trapped in a dark basement for years, and likes flowers when Elizabeth has a picture of a flower in her room. If 2 of the 3 main characters of Security Breach, Gregory and Vanessa, have connections to 2 of the 3 Afton kids, the bite victim and Elizabeth, then theoretically, the 3rd main character of the game, Glamrock Freddy, should be connected with the 3rd Afton kid, Michael. To me, this is really good evidence, probably the best evidence of the theory, but there are also a few other things. In the game's fire ending, Freddy decides that, quote, "It's time to end this," so he burns down the Pizzaplex. Intentionally burning down Fazbear establishments is something done by 2 people throughout the series, Michael Afton and Henry Cheese. Yes, I said cheese, thank you to Gibby for revealing the truth. Regardless, there's not a whole lot of other connections between Henry and Freddy, but Michael does fit pretty well. Freddy does say, "I found myself," and "I am not me," under the pizza place, where Michael and Henry's bodies would both be, meaning his statement of "I found myself" could easily mean he literally found one of their bodies and then they possessed him. So either of them would make sense logically to be Freddy. But Michael, ever since FNaF 2, has been going from location to location trying to fix his father's mistakes and stop him. So the fact that Afton's legacy is being continued by the Mimic means that it's possible Mike could still be around trying to fix things and end his father's legacy. So Freddy burning down the building may be him trying to end the legacy once more. There's a couple more things to consider though. Throughout Security Breach, we collect security badges which are inside small capsules that have Freddy as a security guard on them, and Mike throughout the series is constantly a security guard. Freddy also runs out of power at 2 AM, so his second wind implies some sort of possession. But that all being said, there are some flaws with the theory. First, while his protection for Gregory and the fact that he supposedly found himself in the pizza place does work with this theory, there are many other theories where this can work, so it's not really specific to this idea. With him finding himself, quite literally anyone who has ever been down here can be a viable option. Anyone who's in the FNaF 6 location when it burned, anyone that died at Fredbear's Family Diner if you believe it and FNaF 6 are the same location, and anyone who could have simply died under the Pizzaplex, like the teenagers from the Tales epilogues. The Tales stories may not happen in the games, but similar events may have, so it's possible. My point is, that trait isn't exclusive to Michael. That doesn't mean Michael isn't Freddy, it just doesn't mean he is either. But there's one other major issue I have with this idea. The Ender Rooms in Security Breach are one of the most stressful sections of the game, so I don't blame you if you never want to return after you complete it. But if you do decide to, and choose to bring Freddy with you, he has unique dialogue about it. The same happens in Bonnie Bowl, where if you bring Freddy to Glamrock Bonnie's stage, he expresses how much he misses Bonnie. Clearly, Steelwolf thought about what Freddy would say in certain areas of the Pizzaplex. At a different section of the game, we find the Sticky Note Room, and with it, what fans have dubbed the Staffed-In Family Table. But if you bring Freddy down here, guess what he says? Nothing. Not a single thing. Freddy doesn't bat an eye at the Afton family, and if he was Michael Afton, you'd think he would at least have something to say. Anything. What's even more important is that the same goes for Michael's sister location room. When Freddy goes there, he again has no reaction or response to it, and if he was once the room's occupant, you'd think he'd have something to say about its appearance here. Mike was also the manager for the FNaF 6 location, and Mike says nothing about the restaurant, or about who Burntrap is, considering he literally looks like Michael's father, so why wouldn't he say anything if he was meant to be Michael? It doesn't add up. There are also theories that Michael Afton could still be alive in the modern FNaF timeline, as I talked about in my recent Abyss theory, which you guys should definitely check out if you haven't already. Not only do the missing kids survive for a bit after FNaF 6, meaning the remnant didn't burn away and therefore could have kept Michael alive through the fire, but there's also the FNaF AR emails with the name M. Afton, as well as the fact that we receive the certificate of completion when if Mike dies that wouldn't really make sense. Some theories suggest Mike is actually the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, and although I disagree with that, I could see it possibly being that Mike designed the Glamrock Freddy AI or the animatronic itself, in which case the Princess Quest ending imagery could make sense, but that's a stretch at best and just kind of misleading at worst. Another theory made by my friend the Sandwich Man, who I feel like I've mentioned quite a few times in recent videos, so check him out if you haven't already, talks about evidence that Glamrock Freddy is actually Cassidy. To be fair, this was like 3 years ago, and I don't think he still believes or even thinks that this theory is good, but still it is worth noting. The idea is mostly due to numerous connections between Glamrock Freddy and Golden Freddy. Disregarding their identical initials, there is a golden plushie of Glamrock Freddy in the game that is just named Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy's iconic phrase is also, "It's me," so it's interesting that what Freddy says under FNaF 6 is, "I am not me." Freddy also sometimes teleports across the map to get to Gregory. Area right here too. What the? Freddy, what were you doing in the ceiling? Please explain. And Golden Freddy throughout the series teleports all the time. Freddy is also sometimes represented by only his head, like in the Princess Quest ending. And in all of Golden Freddy's jump scares throughout the series, it's only ever his head, separate from his body. After upgrading Glamrock Freddy with Chica's voice box, Freddy's bow tie weirdly turns purple, just like Fredbear, and Golden Freddy is a version of Fredbear. Similarly, the neon signs in the Pizzaplex show Freddy as yellow with a purple hat and bow tie. And the prototype Fredbear Springlock suit from Secret of the Mimic also has a springlock mechanism that functions similarly to Glamrock Freddy's stomach hatch. There's a lot of connections between Glamrock Freddy and Fredbear and Golden Freddy. Cassidy being under FNaF 6 does make sense as well, since, depending on belief, she may be attached to Afton, keeping him alive before Ultimate Custom Night, or she could be part of the remnant in the fun times which were there in Molten Freddy when the building was burned down. While we're down here, Freddy begins to talk about how his friends are here, angry and confused, but that he'd protect Gregory. Most people believe he's talking about the Glamrocks, but Freddy doesn't really have any way of knowing that they're down here, because although Roxy's eyes do show some things through walls like gift boxes, we, through Freddy's eyes, can see those, and yet we don't see the Glamrocks or Burntrap for that matter. Maybe we don't see everything Freddy sees, but him not mentioning Burntrap at all would be really weird. It's also weird for Freddy to be referring to the Glamrocks in general, because Freddy here is realizing that he himself is not Freddy, so it makes more sense that the friends are the friends of who Freddy actually is. But the only other character down here, besides Burntrap, who obviously doesn't make sense, is the Blob, who is an amalgamation of animatronics in a tangle of wires with a Funtime Freddy head controlling it, who resides underneath FNaF 6. Exactly like Molten Freddy. Molten Freddy, we know, is possessed by the missing children, Cassidy's friends, and I already discussed how Remnant may or possibly may not be destroyed in fire. If not, then if Freddy is Cassidy, the Blob makes sense to be his friends. The survival logbook sees Cassidy try to help the bite victim remember his past, so her protecting Gregory makes sense because she and the bite victim are friends and she has helped him before. If the princess from Princess Quest is Cassidy, it also lines up pretty well that the princess has to go and fight Glitchtrap, and then in the Burntrap ending she goes to fight Burntrap. These connections are all pretty interesting. Unfortunately, there are flaws with this theory as well. First, it partially relies on theories that are honestly unlikely. I discussed in my Abyss theory how I think the Blob is actually Shadow Freddy, largely due to the Blob matching Glitchtrap in Princess Quest, implying he will combine with Glitchtrap to become the game's equivalent of the Afton amalgamation. The Afton amalgamation in the books has Afton in it, representing the Glitchtrap half, and Eleanor, representing the Blob half. And since Eleanor is an agony creature heavily associated with Afton and his crimes, just like Shadow Freddy, it seems to me that the Blob is Shadow Freddy, not the missing kids. I do stand by the idea that Remnant doesn't necessarily have to burn in fire, but I do think even if the missing kids survived the fire, they probably did free themselves afterwards and probably aren't still around. But maybe I'm wrong. It is possible. I think the Blob probably is related to Molten Freddy, but I think he is primarily just shards of discarded old Fazbear animatronics powered by Shadow Freddy. I also do agree that it is weird that we don't see the Glamrocks through Freddy's eyes in the Afton ending, but there is a note in Security Breach that says Roxy has been talking to the other animatronics through walls because she can see them, so Freddy probably actually can see them. I do think the context makes it a little strange for Freddy to be referring to the Glamrocks, but if the Blob isn't possessed by actual spirits, it clearly isn't what he's talking about. He also doesn't see Burn Trap or comment on him at all, which would be weird and would either have to be a continuity error or a mischaracterization if he is meant to be a character that's trying to stop Afton. I also don't think Freddy canonically teleports. I think that's just weird game design, and I think if Cassidy is the princess, it would be weird for her to be Freddy too, because her spirit would probably be occupied with that. It is possible that her soul is split, but there is a much simpler explanation. Glamrock Freddy is the bite victim instead. See, most of the evidence that Glamrock Freddy is Cassidy works just as well, if not better, for the bite victim, and it completely fixes the issue of her being occupied. All the Golden Freddy connections match because the bite victim is connected with Fredbear, he's the one that killed him after all. And you can also argue that he possesses Golden Freddy himself, but that's debatable. The connections to Fredbear specifically also make more sense for the bite victim in this case, and the fact that Freddy ends up being just a head matches very well considering the bite victim lost his head. If the Blob was the missing kids, that matches the bite victim as well, considering he is very closely intertwined with them, and calling Gregory broken makes sense because he was once called broken. Of the options we've discussed so far, this is probably the one with the least problems, but it still does have the problem of Freddy saying nothing about the Stafton table, and that's really weird. So, are there any other options that work any better? There's two more popular options, and one that I don't see nearly enough people talk about. First, Glamrock Freddy is no one in particular. This one has become a lot more popular as time has gone on, especially since the reveal of the Mimic in the books and Ruin. We know that the Glamrock animatronics, including Freddy himself, are possessed by Glitchtrap. We see a possessed Freddy in GGY, and we see how he glitches on stage at the beginning of Security Breach and enters Safe Mode. The Safe Mode program seems to be a part of Freddy that doesn't access the Glitchtrap virus, so he just reverts back to his normal personality. Some also argue that Freddy is an AI who already has his own personality, so him being possessed kinda undermines that a little bit. It's also argued by some that his program gained further sentience while digging under the Pizzaplex. Not from a spirit, but rather his AI just advanced. Personally, I feel like this idea, while not impossible, just plays it a little safe. Freddy saying he found himself under the pizza place just seems kinda random and not at all like his program evolves, especially since he says, "I am not me." And if Freddy is only an AI, he quite literally is him, so that just doesn't make any sense. Also, while I do agree that Freddy's safe mode doesn't access Glitchtrap, I think it's more that Glitchtrap overpowers the spirit inside him, meaning when Glitchtrap isn't running, the spirit takes further control. But the spirit itself also doesn't remember anything, so it's still Freddy's personality, just with some subconscious desires added in. If Freddy had no outside entity influencing his actions, why does he not know why he wants to protect Gregory? Gregory literally asks him why he wants to help, and Freddy says he doesn't know. If the answer is simply that it's because he's in safe mode and knows he's malfunctioning, you'd think he'd know that is the reason he's different. So to me, it seems like that isn't the reason, or at least not the only one. So to me, the idea of Freddy being different purely due to his own AI doesn't make much sense. But him being influenced by a different AI might just make sense. This option has become increasingly popular since Secret of the Mimic, the idea that Glamrock Freddy is actually M1, aka F10N4, aka Fiona. I mentioned earlier that the prototype Fredbear from Secret of the Mimic is very similar in design to Glamrock Freddy. That does seem to connect Glamrock Freddy to Fredbear, but it also may be a connection between Glamrock Freddy and MCM in some way. But how? The God David theory by TDreads is one of the most polarizing theories in recent months. It's the idea that the story of David and the Mimic has direct influences on the story of the bite victim and Gregory. Regardless of what you think about the theory itself, there is a lot very clearly establishing that all three characters are linked in some way, whether just for thematic parallels or if it serves a purpose. For instance, David Murray and the bite victim both died on their birthdays, both are related in some way to the FNaF 4 bedroom and toys, and both seem to be named David. I also already talked about the connections between the bite victim and Gregory's backstory in the retro CDs also seems heavily inspired by or directly taken by the backstory of David. One of the most interesting connections between David and Gregory, though, is this image. This is a picture you can find in the game of David and the Mimic looking down at Murray's costume manor. They are sitting on a hill under a tree, exactly like Gregory and Freddy do in the burn trap ending of Security Breach, facing the opposite direction. It literally mirrors it. But if we say that these images show characters that are connected, that doesn't only make David Gregory, but also makes Freddy the Mimic. Something else I talked about in the last video is the idea that Murray's costume manor is underneath the Pizzaplex. This is the exact same hill, and the walls in the pizza place in ruin are identical to the walls in the Jackie chase sequence. MCM is under the Pizzaplex, meaning by extension, F10N4 is also under the Pizzaplex. Knowing this, the line of "I found myself" makes complete sense to be literal. Glamrock Freddy literally found Fiona under the Pizzaplex, and somehow the program, or even her spirit if you think the original Fiona possessed M1, could have latched onto him. Freddy is Fiona. This also explains why Freddy would want to protect Gregory, because Gregory reminds her of David. The Mixes machine, which M1 resides in, is also made to keep M2 at bay, so it makes sense why Freddy would be going against Afton, because Glitchtrap is the M2 program mimicking him. Game theory recently has been very adamant that M1 is Glitchtrap, but I don't think that's the case. M2 is the version of the Mimic that is associated with wearing and hiding in costumes, which Glitchtrap as well as the Ruin Mimic obviously do. In addition, while the Tales stories aren't in the games, the fact that the animatronics when infected by the Mimic and the Storyteller act much more childish seems to imply that Glitchtrap is the David personality, not Fiona, and David is M2's personality in the games. That way it makes sense that Fiona is in Mixes, going against Glitchtrap because the Mixes machine is made to restrict M2. This would also explain how Gregory and Vanessa knew how to use the Mixes machine, how they knew where it was, and how they knew it existed in the first place, because M1 is inside Freddy, and she was once inside Mixes. One final thing to support this idea is that in the books, the Mimic's endoskeleton had its head removed and replaced, and when the Mimic is used to make the Storyteller, the Tiger animatronic is only a head. So if Glamrock Freddy really is a version of the Mimic, that could explain why he is represented exclusively by a head in the Princess Quest ending. This option makes a whole lot fit together, and I would not at all be surprised if this was the answer that was intended. But there's one other idea that I think might just be a tiny bit more likely. In Freddy in Space 2, yes, we're going there, Freddy Fazbear has a son, and he has a computer program called Lolzhax watching over his son when he's not around. However, Lolzhax ends up going rogue. It infects Freddy's friends, while Freddy still remains a good guy. Freddy then has to run around trying to save his son from Lolzhax and Freddy's friends. Does this sound familiar? It should. It is quite literally the exact plot of Security Breach. Lolzhax is a clear Mimic parallel, being a program made to look after a child, David, when his father, Edwin, wasn't around. But a version of the Mimic goes rogue, becoming Glitchtrap, and takes over Freddy's friends, the Glamrocks, while Freddy still remains a good guy. Freddy then has to run around trying to protect Gregory, a young boy who is strangely connected to David, from the Mimic and the Glamrocks. It might seem like a really random comparison, but it's really not. Freddy in Space 2 released in 2019 when Security Breach was in development and actively being teased. Hell, Roxanne Wolf is literally in Freddy in Space 2, so the inspiration is clearly there. But the fact that Freddy in Freddy in Space 2 is the father whose son Lolzhax is made for, and he is the one whose friends are taken over, means that Freddy in this game represents both Glamrock Freddy and Edwin, meaning they are the same character. On top of that, Lolzhax appears in Security Breach 2, specifically in Phazerblast, Glamrock Freddy's area, and a game about Freddy going to space, clearly showing a connection between Lolzhax and Freddy in Space 2 and Glamrock Freddy. Like I said before, Gregory and David are connected, and the parallels here imply Gregory to be a stand-in for Edwin's son, which matches pretty well. This gives a great reason for Glamrock Freddy to protect Gregory. After all, Edwin built the Mimic to protect David, and he neglected him when he wanted attention. If Edwin is Glamrock Freddy, it makes sense that he is trying to make up for not being able to protect David, now trying to protect Gregory instead. This also still makes sense with the image of Gregory and the Mimic on the hill. M1 and M2 are the same body, and M2 does take on the personality of both David and Edwin, meaning one branch of M2, the David personality, can become Glitchtrap, while the other, the Edwin personality, becomes Freddy, possibly through the data diver idea that I talked about for a different idea in my Old Man Consequences video. Technically, this Freddy in Space 2 idea can support M1 being Glitchtrap since Lolzhex is made to look after David like M1 was, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean that since, like I said, there's a bunch of Mimic branches, so maybe it's just saying that Lolzhex is the Mimic in general. Now, technically Freddy being M1 can work for the Freddy in Space 2 idea. In Freddy in Space 2, it's never said that Freddy made Lolzhex. Fiona is David's mother, so her being Freddy still technically works. Whatever the case, Space Freddy can represent either Edwin or Fiona, and the Mimic version of them can then be Glamrock Freddy. Overall, I think Edwin being Glamrock Freddy just makes a bit more sense because Fiona is probably already dead by the time the Mimic is created in the first place, but technically that isn't certain, so Fiona being Freddy also works quite well, and I think either option does make sense. The one thing these ideas don't explain is why Glamrock Freddy has so many connections to Golden Freddy, but I think this is something that simply hasn't been explained yet. We met Mixes in Ruin and it wasn't explained until Secret of the Mimic. This is an ongoing story, so not everything has been revealed yet, but there might be some hints here and there. The Mimic up until this point has been very heavily associated with Spring Bonnie because that is the form he takes as Glitchtrap, but Spring Bonnie is just one half of the puzzle. We've seen some Fredbear and Golden Freddy stuff here and there, but no solid connections between them and the Mimic, but maybe that's where we're going in the future. Take a look at the parachute ending. When we step into the office, we see the F10N4 machine. It's basically in the place where the desk should be, but that's not the only thing that appears in that spot. It's also the exact spot Golden Freddy appears in FNaF 1. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that could be a small hint at some sort of connection the Mimic has to Golden Freddy that will be expanded on in the future. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me and who you think Glamrock Freddy is. My next theory video will be revisiting the Tales story Didophobia, and it's turning out to be a pretty interesting theory, so stay tuned if you're interested, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!